Hello, everyone, and I hope you're all well. My name is Tanner Dagenet, and I'm the host of Self-Sabotage Solutions. On this podcast, it's my opportunity and my pleasure to be able to share everything I know about self-sabotage, but also to be able to share other people's self-sabotage stories, because it's so important that we know that no matter who we are, where we come from, or what we've experienced in life, that we're all able to overcome self-sabotage. And so today I'm very, very excited because we have Freedom From Self-Sabotage Coach, Kinesiologist, and EFT Practitioner Anna Grillo. Is that how you say it?
Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
Grillo,
perfect.
yeah.
Awesome. And we have her on the line today, and I'm very, very excited to have her on the podcast. Just looking over her website and her Facebook and just seeing all of her posts. It's such an amazing, she just has a way about her, and I'm very, very excited to be able to, just kind of hear her story and kind of see, where she came from, and how she was able to get to where she is, where she's helping so many people. So thank you for coming on the podcast, and if you can just introduce yourself a little bit, and we can go into your story.
Great, thank you. Well, hello everyone. So I'm Anna Grillo. I do many things, but I guess it could probably be summed up that I really help people transform their lives when they're at that real pivotal moment, and really get strong with their mindset. Because the more I do this work, the more I realize just how intertwined the mind, body, spirit, it all comes in together. It's not just the one or the other. It's really exciting to see.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that you do so much stuff, but then you can just tie it into one certain thing and help people on such an amazing level. So where are you located in?
Yeah, so I'm in probably a couple of hours out from Melbourne in Victoria, Australia. So I used to be a city girl through and through. And a few years ago, it was probably end of 2018, my husband and I were just like, yeah, he'd been saying for a while, he was like, yeah, we're ready to go and just, leave everything behind. I was like, yeah, no, but what about all the things? And, which is really interesting because I home educate my children. We always chose to do that. And suddenly I was just like, oh, it's the call of the intuition. And that's probably something we'll get into. But over time, when I felt that, it was like, it's time to go. I was like, all right, let's do it. So we sold up in Melbourne, and we'd actually had this little tiny beach shack a few hours out. And we said, worst case scenario, we'll go live out there until we find what it is that we want. And, that happened all throughout 2019 and, beginning of 2020, we finally settled and said, right, let's get started. And then, as we know, what happened in 2020, it was a really beautiful space to, I guess, ride out what was happening out in the world. So, but after all this time, earlier on in this year, we found our beautiful little acreage and little farm for our self-sustainable and off-grid lifestyle that we'd love to get into. That's where I am right now.
That's fantastic. Yeah. I would definitely want to hear more about that later on, about your little acreage. That's something I want to eventually do, is get my own little piece of land and be self-sustaining. So that's fantastic. Now, if you can just kind of I guess I'm not sure exactly where you want to start, but where you start wherever you think is good for your self-sabotage story. Where you maybe started encountering self-sabotage or.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess for me, it's interesting that, look, I just, I followed the rules, so to speak. Yeah. I went to school, went to uni, got the corporate job, climbed the ladder, got married. And, I really, when I look back, I really enjoyed work. And, with hindsight, what I realized what I enjoyed about it was the positive feedback that I was getting. That was my external focus. So I was doing things because I was getting the external stimulus of, oh, that's so great. You're really great. La, 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 la. And that filled me up to a level. On the flip side of that, physically, I was exhausted, suffering from gut issues. And then towards the end, my husband and I were like, okay, let's get ready to start a family. And literally, from someone having a really regular cycle, it was like, I'd always had a bit of issues around in that area anyway, but my cycle started lengthening out. And I knew straight away, I'm like, this is just stress. And I just woke up with this, being at the pit of my stomach every single morning, because on one level I enjoyed work, and also, but the high I guess, the high. And when I talk through the lens of the addiction to stress, eventually the come down, which was this feeling of exhaustion and just, what am I doing with my life, was too much. So I got sick of my own bullshit, basically. The pain was too much. And it's like, you can't keep avoiding this. And so, that time it was I was working in HR. It was the middle of the global financial crisis, and I got another promotion. And I would have had to deal with managing and overseeing all these redundancies happening and so forth. And I was just like, I cannot do this. And I happened to have a mentor at work, and she just said, right, one day I was there, I was crying, and she's like, what is it you want to do with your life? And for me, so I was just like, I want to study kinesiology. It was something that I happened to come across a few years earlier. I had done a few little workshops. But for me, it was always like, when I've done all the things, basically when I've worked my ass off, then I'll be able to relax and do something for me. And she's like, well, what's stopping you? And at that time, we had just, my husband was literally building our house because he's a tradie, and he was starting his own business. But I thought, and I was the primary earner, but I was like, you know what? That's starting to build up. I'll get a job. I don't care what I'm doing. I will do contract work, temp work. I'll be a receptionist, whatever. And she's like, well, okay, well, what are you going to do about it? And I just said, I'm going to quit my job. And in that moment, the weight just lifted off my shoulders. I couldn't believe, I still feel this now. And that feeling was just this biggest sense of relief. And I was like, oh my gosh, I couldn't believe it. And so finally, it had gotten so bad that I could not ignore my own needs, basically. And even though I'm such a people pleaser and felt terrible and guilty, and I'm letting people down and so forth, it was fine. It was disappointing, but it was all good. Everyone's replaceable, in the workplace. Mm-hmm. And I was able to transition out over months, train a new person in. And it was 3 months later, on my last day, I found out that I was pregnant. So everything, as I said, works out for a reason. But that's just the start of my self-sabotage journey, because, within that, I was able to realize this is an internal process. And so I had dropped one stress, but then really just hopped into another because I was pregnant. I was studying kinesiology as well, and that was wonderful. But I was also on my path. I was on a much more aligned path moving forward. So from there, I guess all little revelations, as I mentioned, when you're on a more aligned path, suddenly things become easier. It's still challenging because, I've gone through upteenth levels of reviewing my self-sabotage, and what I like to call, we get off the merry-go-round of paralysis by analysis, of where we feel stuck all the time. And I'm actually now onto the spiral of ascension. So each time there is, I guess, a dark night of the soul, so to speak, I'm able to shift, transform, and learn from the lessons. And, then sometimes a new one to come through, but I'm not dealing with the same old crap anymore. So that was the beginning of my journey.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's really cool. And for everyone who doesn't know what kinesiology is, can you explain that as well for a little bit?
Yeah. So it's a whole concept that the body has the answers. So it's a mind, body, spirit modality. And we use muscle testing. So basically a practitioner will use muscle testing and ask questions of the body, and the body will sort of respond, whether it is it's not a matter of strength, but whether something is aligned, so to speak, it holds, nice and firm. If something is out of balance, it's like, yeah, no, I'm not really liking that. And so it is this blend of, I really love it because they say Western science, but because you're looking at a lot of, anatomy and physiology, but then also blending the Eastern philosophies. So we look through the chart of traditional Chinese medicine and 5-element law, so the meridians, within the body. And that's sort of our guide, because within that system, it is linked to the body, muscles, organ, glands, hormones. And then, we do use, the 4 pillars are, where is the root cause of this stress coming from? Is it a structural issue, a biochemical issue, an emotional, or an energetic? And so from there, we can really delve deep into what's going on, sometimes down to a cellular level. Other times it could be, you know, a past life or something like that. So yeah, it's a beautiful mix. I love it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, I actually use muscle testing, the duckbill muscle test. I don't know if you know what duckbill is.
Yeah.
I use that like every day in my life. So I love
Beautiful.
it. So yeah, amazing. Yeah, and for anyone listening, yeah, highly recommend at least looking into muscle testing or kinesiology in general, because it's super helpful and impactful in anyone's life.
Yeah, absolutely it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So in your story, like, you know, where did you go from there? After, you know, you did the kinesiology, you got pregnant. Congrats, by the way.
Yes.
That was awesome. That's awesome.
Thank you. Yeah. So, and that was, you know, the start of my, yet again, it's a different shift. So for me, you know, the whole thing, I guess, like when I look back, like I said, I was such a rule follower. People now think I'm some radical with all the things that's going on. So I was very fortunate. Yes, I had a hospital birth, but I had a natural delivery. While I was studying kinesiology, that's where I first really got into health and nutrition. So where I heard about paleo. So, you know, Dr. Lauren Cordain, Rob Wolf's work, and Mark's Daily Apple, who is the primal blueprint Marxism. And as I started studying and going through there, this is what's really interesting. That was my really first, or probably second foray into the whole of, oh wow, so they lied about that, they lied about fats, they lied about wheat and all these type of things. What else are they lying about? And then also within those discussions, I had an amazing nurse who took us for anatomy and physiology, and a couple of other lecturers. And obviously they're practitioners, so they're out there, they've been, you know, working with clients for 10, 20 years. And what are they noticing? How they're working with children. And the whole issue around vaccines came up. And so that was my next initiation, because I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I was working with a naturopath at the time. And she said, look, she goes, I support women who choose not to vaccinate. Those who choose to vaccinate, I have a detox protocol. There's, you know, you use your homeopathics and so forth. And I just went, I can still follow the rules, but I can also detox. Win-win, that was it. So we decided no vaccines at birth anyway. But then once we settle in, let's go along, and we've got to find the doctor, because that's what you do. You need a doctor because everyone's off running with their kids to the doctors, aren't they? But I've got my detox, so yay. So my husband and I both went. I said, oh, we've got, you know, it's supposed to be a really good doctor. Let's go along. And as I'm there, so you give the drops just before, there's, you know, the night before and just before they receive the injection. And he's like, oh yeah, what's this? So I'm like, oh yeah, the homeopathics, la la. And he's like, oh, okay, rolls his eyes and has a bit of a chat. But I'm like, whatever. I'm like, gives me my peace of mind. And as he's giving her the injection, he's like, anyway, baby's immune systems aren't even ready till 6 months of age. The first few shots are just to train the parents. My heart just dropped. And I vowed in that moment that I would never go against my mothering instinct again. So me and my husband were like, yeah. Mind you, we'd got there because we're like, oh, you've got to get the whooping cough shot as well. So we lined up as well thinking, oh, you've got to do the right thing. And so we walked out of there and we looked at each other and I'm like, we are delayed, but what I really mean is she ain't getting no more. And that was when I had to go, right, you can't rely on other people. I need to go down and do the research now. And so I started reading and asking questions and talking to other doctors as well. And what I found was really interesting. One doctor's like, in a practice of 10, because we're all parents here, only half of us vaccinate our kids. Another doctor was like, you know, he believed in some vaccines, but you should be able to pick and choose the schedule and take them individually and so forth. So the more questions I got, with the questions I was asking, the feedback I was getting was like, yeah, no, you're on the right track. And so I just continued to do that. And look, to be honest, back then it was a lot easier to, you know, I guess fly under the radar, so to speak. But, you know, I got pushback definitely from family and people, some people who knew. A lot of people were supportive, but that was my big foray into like, I'm really bucking the system here and having to prove myself. And so for me, I always talk about know thyself. I knew what it is that I needed to feel empowered in that. And I think that's a really key distinction, is because there are people who choose not to vaccinate, but but still come from a very fearful place, and they're constantly bombarded with the world coming back at them. But I was very solid in my knowledge and in my decision as well. So people would go, oh, okay, that's interesting. And to be honest, most people were just like, oh, wow, that's amazing. Like, I wish I could do that. Or how could you, how did you do that? Have those conversations with the doctor and so forth. So that was probably my next initiation into, pulling back from the system, unraveling from the matrix. Yeah, that was the second one.
Lifting that veil, so to speak, and, seeing, that was a big wake up call for me when I started looking at that stuff. And I was just like, what, like, we're just told our whole life that's what we're supposed to do. And, I was just like, it's like you, just the order follower, just, hey, the guy in the white lab coat says to do this, let's do it. And when I started looking into it, I was just blown away. So definitely understand that. So where did your story go from there?
So, and I guess just touching back on that, I not only was I informed about that, I was studying anatomy and physiology. And so I knew how the body worked. That was another thing. Again, knowledge is power. I felt really confident. Like, they were talking about fevers, how fever works. It's there to fight off any germs that it comes in. So why would you want to suppress that off? It's the first stage. It helped me become a lot more empowered. And then also I'd studied a bit of homeopathy as part of that. And so for me, I really had an array of things to start going to before I even needed to even think about going to perhaps a doctor, because I'm not anti-medicine, not at all. I just had my whole little toolkit to go through first and go from there. So that made things a lot easier. And then, I had my son a couple of years later, who's completely I say my kids are back's free. It's much easier than say, oh, they just had one shot. One just had one and that was it. So, and that's, really beautiful to see, just sort of the slight differences and nuances that goes through that. But then it came time for my daughter to go into kinder. And there was just something within me that was like, this isn't right, doesn't feel right. Now, she's a very sociable person. She's very highly emotionally and socially intelligent. So I wasn't worried about her needing to play with other kids. What I found interesting was that I've got a niece and nephew. And so my niece is 4 years older than her, and they got along so well. They would play. I could just see the beautiful interaction for both of them, because my niece would be able to, be able to step up and have her follow along and teach her things. And then my daughter was loving to be able to be stretched in that knowledge, so to speak. And my nephew, who's the exact same age as her, they'd play for a little bit, but then they would just, would end up in tears and in fights, because it is both developmentally appropriate actions and things that they were doing, because at that stage, in the 2, 3, 4, this is mine and so forth, the concept of sharing, requires a bit of smoothing out there. It doesn't come as natural. And that's nothing because of the individual, it's just the nature of where they were developmentally. And I just thought, my gosh, imagine being then around in an environment with all other kids the same age wanting the same things. How stressful would that be for her? One. So I was like, okay, we'll do a look at alternative schooling. You got your Montessori and your Steiner and so forth. But even then, I was like, the whole concept of dropping her off and separating just didn't feel right. So I started looking into homeschooling. And like back then, was probably in 2014, there wasn't a lot of information, particularly in Australia. That's not, I know in America it's quite common. Australia, there was nothing. Obviously, there is a community, but it wasn't really, no one spoke about homeschooling. It just was never, you'd never even heard. I knew no one in my family, in our social circle, in their social circles. It was nothing. And so good old Facebook, there is a benefit in the face of books there. And so I just started looking and I found a couple of groups. And so I attended a meet and, learned some things, and I found one that was near me. And they happened to have similar age children and parents, similar style. And we would sort of just gather once a week at the park and we would do interesting activities together. And it just sort of grew from there. And then when it came for her to start school the next year, I was just like, I think I'm just going to give this a go. We'd found, a solid little network there. So that was yet again my next foray into judgment and, so-called persecution from others. And what do you mean they're not going to school? What's this? yeah, so that was my next one. Finding
So you go, what were we gonna say?
No, yeah, just going down that path of and how do children learn? And that probably really ties in lovely with, again, the kinesiology and childhood development, being able to move their bodies in a way they're not constricted, even just like within footwear, and things like that, being outside and really noticing how quality versus quantity of time, because we might have done some meets regularly, once or twice a week, but playing for hours on end, unstructured, is so much more fulfilling than, these little recesses and lunch times, and they have to share and the friends, and there's all these drums, and going back to school, you can't resolve anything. It was very interesting to be able just to see that path. And for me, it was like, it just seemed natural in order to help a child really come into their own, know who they are, what, how they work, and being able to come back and take breaks as needed. It was wonderful to see.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It's so interesting. I love the way you explained it and kind of went through like the different steps of how you looked into it and your thought process. Because me and my wife have been looking a lot into like homeschooling as well, because it just doesn't feel right, like you said, to just let them go away for like, that's one of the biggest things I thought was like weird about like society in general, is just we all like split our separate ways and go for like 8 to 9 hours a day, just all separate from each other. But like we're the people we want to be around, right? Obviously it's good to meet with other people and stuff like that too, but I just always thought it was weird that you just split from your family and your loved ones for so long throughout the day. And I just love the homeschooling idea. So thank you so much for sharing that portion of it. So where did you go from there after that?
So again, it's just, like I said, it's the spiral of ascension. Little things shifts. And so, again, as I mentioned before, when you live an aligned path, things come across a lot easier. Like, you meet the right people, and just even, through the homeschool community, also even just through business. And I've never really had issues. People that came to me was just like, oh yes, great, and uplifting and really supportive. They weren't like me, but they were respectful and understanding and encouraging. But my people-pleasing ways and my addiction to stress was still manifesting there in the background. And it got to a stage, where I just noticed, I'm like, I'm not liking my behavior. I'm on edge. I felt I was fighting fires all the time. So behaviors that did me well, a decade prior, and what I enjoyed in the corporate space, a fast-paced environment, was actually really just stress, because it's easy to react to things in the moment. And that's what I was really good at. But if I had to just sit and stop and create, that was a very different story. I was still having that exhaustion. My self-sabotage is to stay up late and consume. So there's this whole consumption versus creation force that was going in. And so I came across a woman who was an addiction specialist. And I thought, oh, how interesting. Like, I don't have a sexy addiction of, drinking or doing coke and all these types of things. It's pretty boring. But I could tell I had these, I knew I was addicted to stress, like something underneath this all. And that just, she just helped me hold space. So I really went down this whole concept of spiritual companioning. And so these last few years, alongside the self-sabotage coaching, but spiritual companioning process, which is really this whole thing of holding space, being seen, heard, and witnessed for who you truly are. And in that space, she also started incorporating emotional freedom technique, which is also known as EFT or tapping. And for me, basically what that is you're tapping on certain meridian points or acupuncture points. And the whole purpose of that is, as you're stimulating those acupuncture points, you're sending signals back up to the brain to go, hey, stress response, calm down. That previous memory or past memory, it's like what we're doing is just taking off the red flags. It's okay. It's just a memory. We don't need to trigger off our fight, flight, stress response. And I adored that, because in kinesiology, we work with those points all the time. And I thought, what an empowering way to help clients in that moment, especially moving into an online model, being able to do that. Because, as a practitioner, we're not there when it's, 11 o'clock at night or something happens in that moment. It was a really beautiful tool to empower people to be able to help reduce their stress in those moments themselves. And so through that path, I've become an EFT practitioner and a trainer as well. So that was my biggest thing, is really slowing down, and I'm still doing it now to this day, but really embodying and noticing my my intention, my subconscious reaction really to go into that freeze mode. There's a lot of freeze, a lot of stuck, because that was a lot of my stuff. Because it's funny, because in some ways I've made so many strides in my life, but I still felt mentally, stuck in an old pattern. And so when we recognize that holding space for self is, we are no longer calling upon the inner critic, which is, for me, that's the stress response of I feel like this whip, someone with a whip at the back, and you just keep going, and you're crawling, and oh my gosh, just keep moving, versus calling upon the inner carer to go, hey, I see you, I hear you, come here, let me just envelop you in this beautiful warm hug, and what is it that you actually need right now? And to move that way with grace and compassion and kindness, just ultimately we're moving, from fear into love. That's what that is. But that space is to just hold us in that space, because really, whenever we go back, a lot of, as we know, the subconscious, it's all about previous experiences. And so we're going back to that beautiful inner child, that past self, and saying, hey, what is it that you needed right now? And I'm here for you. Ultimately, we can't rely on the external, other people, to give that to us. When we get to that stage of detachment and are able to give ourselves the love, the attention that we needed, like, that's true freedom.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. So many people are kind of like always relying on like external sources for love, and they always think like, oh, when I get this thing, I'll be happy, or when I get this thing, I'll be able to love myself. But when we see it that way, we're just never going to be able to get that love, because we always see that love as something external, something outside of us. We can all love each other or love ourselves, like right now, exactly how we are, and that doesn't mean we're stopped or we're stuck. It just means that we can love ourselves, and then we can actually usually move forward much quicker. So I completely agree with that. Getting away from that fear response, that stress response, and going to a place of love and a place of acceptance.
Yeah, absolutely. Because every client, we all seem to be a reflection of self. You probably find that as people that you're working with, and so aware, like, I knew exactly what was going on. If only they did this, is because of that in them, and if only they worked on that, and if they no longer did this, then I would be happy. So very aware. They know exactly what's going on, but they're still stuck, because in this pattern, like I said, the paralysis by analysis, in this merry-go-round of this stress loop that's going on in the body. And so when we're able to cut through that and just go, okay, yeah, how does that scenario, despite all of that, even though that is happening, how does that make you feel? And when you start then going down, really shifting in, it makes me angry, frustrated, sad, you really then get to go down into that path of because it reminds me of feelings of being abandoned, rejected, not accepted, root cause type stuff. And then when we get to that space, like, yes, they're doing that, that means nothing. When you come into this space and can heal that, and how can you show yourself the love that you never got, you felt you never received? How can you start showing that yourself and giving yourself the connection strategies to do so? Call upon the inner carer. That's where true healing begins, because suddenly you're not, for me, like, I talk about this analogy of, imagine walking around with a matchstick, and then everyone else has got the little strikey paper against them. Suddenly those things, there's nothing to strike up against anymore. So that when you've got it, say a scenario with your husband, I don't know, he's pissed you off about something and there's a certain pattern that keeps happening. When you sort of work on that and delve deeper into that space, suddenly you're able to, and you've worked in resolving it, it's triggering me. I'm feeling triggered because, I don't know. And we work on it and it's cleared and, it's an abandonment issue or you didn't feel loved, and you work on clearing the holding space and transforming that. Suddenly there's nothing to strike up against. And so that thing is a non-issue anymore. Then the next thing comes along that you get to work on and go, oh, okay. And so that's what tends to happen. And so suddenly when we do the work on ourselves, it's no longer, we can start to really work into that concept of detachment from everyone else has got their own spiritual path to go on. And we can't control that. So we can only control really ourselves and how we choose to respond through to that.
I agree with that. And I loved your story so far, just talking about like the different steps you've gone through. It's so interesting the way you're explaining it. And I totally agree. It's not really like about like perfection. It's about progression, like moving on to the next stage and moving on to the next stage. And, like more like a sense of discovery, like learning about yourself and, learning about like the actual root causes, like you're talking about. So many people are just looking at like the external, effects or the external like symptoms. And they're thinking like, oh, that's what's wrong. But then they're not looking inwards and looking at like the actual root cause. So I love the way that you explained it, and I totally 100% agree with that. So where did the self-sabotage coaching come into play, or when you were learning that information, like, at what point is that coming up?
Yes, yeah. I was like, for my last one. So in between that time, I probably found Jason's work. It was around not long after my son was born. So it would have been 2014, 2015 on one of my late night scrolls going through, and I'm like, I love this guy. He thinks like what I do, like how I think, and he's actually saying it like, oh my gosh, like everything Jason talks about. I'm like, yeah, been there, done that. I don't go talking about it though. Yeah. And it's just like little things. Yeah, so that's so I make little comments, but I'm very much a mediator. And so I'm great at, I recognize your side, your story, the other person's story. So like even when you'll see some of some stuff that I've done about home education, even like I'm a proud Freedom Keeper. I'm part of Freedom Keepers here it's a worldwide organization that really, kicked off before COVID. But obviously, it was a lifesaver for me, in particular during 2020, 2021, because I live in Victoria, one of the most, was the most lockdown city in the world. And I was very fortunate that I was living regionally, so not in Melbourne at the time. And again, it's these little steps that take us there. And so being aware of Jason's work, the self-sabotage, each time I was able to analyze, like, what am I doing? What's going on here? How can I get to the root cause? And so I've been doing that work for quite a while and being exposed to that. So I really feel for people within the last year who just had to, wake up, so to speak, because they didn't have the luxury of easing the way into it. So Jason's work really helped, particularly around the mind control programming, that what we get from societal influences, the media and so forth. That was just like, once you start to see that, it's like, oh my gosh, like it's, next level. And so I've been following his work for ages, and then I decided, it was last year, I believe, that I signed up to do, to do the coaching work with it, to really, again, it's just getting those deeper layers into it and being able to educate people, because once you know, if something resonates with you, you take it on board. It's always there at the back of your mind. So it's just another way to help people become empowered with their decisions, to recognize what's going on within them. And that's so important, like the environment. And not that everything is all doom and gloom, like, oh my gosh, they're programming us and all of that stuff. It's like, well, okay, now that we know their tricks, how do we use it for our benefit and utilizing that? So that's that beautiful way of recognizing how come things such as affirmations and positive statements and what you surround yourself with is so important, and incorporating that. But it's also knowing that there's deeper work. It's not just you throw up a few little statements and that's it. It's being able to really understand why they're so important and keying in the right one so it helps reprogram whatever is lying there underneath.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I feel like another big part of it is just like kind of removing those negative influences. Like, I mean, once you understand just like how important those is, like, you know, the affirmations and things like that are, like, and like why they are important, like how, you know, how they're actually affecting you, then you can be like, oh wait, these other things are affecting me, like the television or you know, who, you know, your friends or, you know, whatever, right? Like those things are all encompassing and all influencing you. So, you know, I think a big part of it, like people like put up the affirmations and just do that by itself, and they don't see the results, and like, oh, whatever, I'm done. But then they did, because they didn't look at it like at a big picture, like, you know, where else am I getting influence? There's counteracting, you know, there's some destructive interference going on where there's some good and some bad, and it kind of cancels each other out. So I totally agree with you on that. So I was going to ask you, so for like, I know a big part of it was like for me, for like going through my self-sabotage stuff was kind of addressing my health, like changing the foods I was eating. So what kind of role was that for you? And I'm sure you probably started doing that when you were doing like the kinesiology and stuff, or at what point did you start addressing like the foods you were eating and things like that?
Yeah, that was early on, like, as I was studying kinesiology. So from around, it was after my daughter was born in particular. So yeah, it would have been around 10 years ago now, where I was like, okay, let's give this a go. And as soon as I took out the weight, it was game changing for me, because I always had this exhaustion feeling and digestive issues. So doing some further testing, and like I've got the gene for celiac, but when they did testing, there was nothing to show. But I'm like, regardless, obviously there's a predisposition here. And you know, initially sometimes you can go down a gluten-free path, but I was like, no, I could tell really quickly the difference between eating substitutes versus eating real food. And so I guess my thoughts have changed over time, where it's just really much about just eat real food. So that was the time I was binging out on Sean Croxton, Underground Wellness, his podcast. Brilliant. I loved it. So yeah, he finished that a few years ago, but it should still be around. He had brilliant doctors and thought thinkers all on, you know, the cutting edge. And it's interesting because that's where I really learned as well. When something suddenly becomes like in science, a breakthrough, it takes a good 10 to 15 years before it even gets rolled out into the mainstream. So that's why we're hearing about paleo and all that type of stuff now, but we've been doing it for 10 years like that. And I could really see how that works. So that was even before I started. It was already good 4 or 5 years into it. So I could see how that really exploded onto the mainstream. But also, you know, going seasonal, local, organic, whole food. So slow jerk, just remembering those. And yeah, just focusing into that. Like I've evolved, I've done many different things. But that is just, I mean, eating like our ancestors did. And right now, what I'm really focused on is probably mineral rebalancing. So that is very similar to the root cause protocol, where you're really looking at like, I'm taking adrenal cocktails to help nourish the adrenals, and that's usually made up of you know, some orange juice, a bit of cream of tartar for your potassium, and salt. So things like that to help balance that out. Looking at using magnesium, you know, rubbing that into the skin a lot. Using beef liver and oyster to help balance out that copper zinc ratio. So I need to get a hair mineral analysis at some stage done to check those. But really, and things can be really simple. Sometimes we overcomplicate. Like I've done the whole removing of stuff, and like certain things work for certain stages. And that's why I'm always very big on, I don't like labels. When people talk, you know, I'm paleo or I'm vegan or so forth, because things might work really well for you in that moment. And they may be really required for a few weeks or months or potentially years, but you really need to be into connecting in with yourself and how you're feeling, so you can adjust and start incorporating meat if you're, you've been doing green juices all your life or whatever, and if that's what your body is craving, not to look at these different substitutes, because, there's that meme going around. This is what they mean when they say plant-based food. It's not vegetables, it's all crap. Like, your body looks at ingredients, but that's not life. It's not nourishment. So it is much better to eat fruit, like the people who won't even touch fruit, than having some, making up a clean slice. It's got all these nuts and dates and sort of stuff in that. I don't know. It's just, I try to make as many things as possible. I also do an 80-20 rule, because there are times where it's just life as well. But then I just, I know I don't give myself a hard time. I just jump back onto eating clean. But that is probably one of the ones that I know Jason talks a lot about, getting your health done first and foremost. So I know my triggers, and I know that when I stay up late and then I wake up and in the morning I'm not feeling the best I can be, I'm more inclined to go for something with a sugar rush that's going to give me a quicker hit. So it's like, oh, I know what I'm doing. What is it that I really need now? Why am I staying, and really delving back, because it's not necessarily about the food. Well, it isn't about the food. It's about, well, what is it that I'm actually really, truly needing, and why am I giving myself the adequate rest and nourishment that I need? And so it's just, for me, it's retraining my whole body to know that it's okay to run on feeling good, not on that exhaustion, because that's how I got things done. Yeah.
So when you think when you stay up late that night, it kind of brings your subconscious back to what you used to be doing when you were in that stressed out state, and that's maybe why you reach for that sugar. And
yeah. And for me, I realized, like, I take that back to being in school days. I used to stay up late and read, because reading was my escape. So my freeze sort of programming there, but that was my way to decompose from the day, because I was so open, surrounded by people. Like, I'm such an introvert. Please leave me in the mountains by myself. I'd come out once a month and get my tea, and then that's it. Like, even now I'm like, oh, please, I am such a hermit. So the online works really well, because I can then turn it off, and that's it, go and not have to deal with anyone else. But that was my way to sort of, recharge and escape. I love my sci-fi fantasy books, and, escape from the world. And for me, just having to show up constantly as a child, being surrounded by people, I guess probably energetically as well, because I would, just, I guess, as an empath, but being sensitive to other people's energies, so to speak, and not knowing. So I was a bit of a sickly child when, there's nothing necessarily wrong with me, but I was just, very flat. So, my mother worried about me at times, and there were times when I'd have ear infections and tonsil stuff, which, would have been dairy and stuff like that. And I just wanted to be in my room and shut out the world. So for me, staying up late and reading is that's a big trigger. Well, it's a comfort for me, but that is something that I'm noticeable. I'm consuming versus creating. Okay, so it's like I'm trying to fuel myself up, because with feel good emotions, but then, that's my high, but my come down then is the next morning. Oh, shit, I did it again. I've got a whole day to face. And then then your energy's spent. And so the thing happens again and again. So, I mean, that's just me. Like I said, it's nothing sexy. That's like people who go, drink every night to numb out, just to cope, just to get through, before the kids go to bed, or doing drugs and so forth. Similar concept. And when the come down comes, that's the addictive state that needs to be looked and healed.
I think that's very interesting, because most people think it's it's always the drugs, or it's always the alcohol, but it could be small things like just binge watching Netflix, or the television, or staying up all night like you were, or maybe just going out partying, or whatever, right? There's all different kinds of, or just shoving your face full of food, right? There's so many different kinds of, like, finding your relaxation or your like dopamine fix or whatever, right? Where people are kind of like using that as their out, or their way to avoid their pain they're feeling, or whatever. So I think that is really important, like a very interesting point you make about it's what for you, it wasn't like the alcohol or the drugs, or it was just reading books and staying up late, which I actually haven't heard of before, but that's awesome.
I know. Oh my gosh, what a nerd. I love it. Yeah. But this is the thing, is a lot of people are like, oh, they don't have vices, so to speak. And that doesn't necessarily mean, I mean, I know people, you can have alcohol, enjoy. If it's not an issue, it's not an issue. I mean, I know Jason will say no, or, depending on what's sort of going on. But again, it depends when it becomes too much and you rely on it. Having that foresight to really delve through. But as you said, I mean, just, people being in a constant panic state, like little things you might not realize, but it's like, take a look at that behavior a little bit closely and see, where is it protecting you? Because that's really what it's doing, is trying to protect me from the next day of having to show up and be around people. It sort of just gave me that feel good moment. But and so I end up, sort of craving that. But then, on the downside, then I procrastinate. It's also a procrastination tool. So I'm not showing up, when I'm feeling tired and exhausted. So there's also, giving permission to show up and be who I am in the world. And so I really, like channeling Jason and really said what I wanted to say. And that's okay. Like, I'm getting a lot more confident in doing that, and speaking my truth. I am pretty confident in that. But
That's awesome. That's a fantastic story. I really love it. And I want to talk a little bit about, and we kind of touched on this tiny bit, but for me, I know, like, just like my inner dialogue, like the thoughts I would tell myself. So, like, for instance, like we're on here talking, doing some public speaking and, like, in front of other people. That was something that I would never have done before. Like, I would always tell myself, and I think this one's a pretty common one, where people just like telling themselves they hate public speaking and that they're terrible at it. And then when they have to do it, they get like super scared and jittery and go with the or pausing and breaking up. And that was totally me for the longest time. But I started changing my thoughts around, and now, of course, I'm in front of other people speaking, and that really helped with a lot with my confidence in general. So when did you start making changes like that? Was it back when you were doing like all the kinesiology and stuff, or was it farther on? Or
and it would have been from my kinesiology days. Like, I remember I had a couple of incidences public speaking. My gosh, that didn't go well, because I wasn't prepared and doing and stuff like that. So I know what it's like then then when you next go in, it literally is your body. I can feel it. I knew that my body was like just remembering that time, the embarrassment, not knowing what to say and things like that. So I did a mix of, you can use something like kinesiology. That's why I love emotional freedom technique as well, because as you're doing the mindset stuff and changing the mind, I can do this and feeling more confident in that. You can also tap on some of the acupuncture points to help just really circuit that into the brain. So because, even doing, for me, when something comes up for you as a trigger, it's like, stop, drop and breathe. Just stop what you're doing. Just drop into the heart space or drop into the body. Just take one deep breath in and out. Okay. Now, from this space, what am I noticing right now? And so it could be, what's the talk that's going on? What am I noticing in my body? The heartbeat's up, shallow breathing. And just recognizing that is a big one. I'm noticing that I'm feeling this, angry, stressed, worried. Okay, well, what's the story you're telling yourself? And let's just say it is about public speaking. I'm nervous. I'm noticing that I'm nervous. And I really like the concept of I notice, because it just helps put a bit of space and distance and detachment into the feeling as well. Okay, I'm noticing that I'm feeling this right now. Okay. And sometimes it might be, well, is that true? You need to ask yourself, because you might have a scenario where someone's in front of you and they're annoying you or whatever. And so, well, what is it that you actually need? Because usually it's almost like our emotional backpack is now overflowed, because when we're in that beautiful state of connection, when we're really fueling our body with nourishing deeds and practices, our tendency or our ability, the space, I love talking about the space in between, you know, that reaction, it's a lot bigger. When it starts to get much smaller, then it's very easy then to go back into old patterns. So recognizing what is that I need, and then going, well, what is it? You know, I'm actually really embarrassed. Like, what if I stuff this up? Okay, well, what can you do right now? Instead of the inner critic pushing through, I'm going to stuff this up. Like, I'm so embarrassed, because a really different mindset talk to that versus the inner carer go, I notice I'm feeling really nervous right now. What if I stuff this up? Okay, what do I need? It's okay. Like, what would you say to the younger version of yourself, or to your best friend, or to a child? It's okay. Just take a deep breath in, you know, breathe out, and it's all going to be okay. Just take it slow, and give yourself the talk, the prep talk, the positive thinking that you sort of need to support you through that.
Yep. Totally agree. Yeah, actually, every time I go for like before a podcast or something, I'm talking myself up before that, giving myself a little prep talk. So just like exactly what you're talking about. And I find it's so beneficial. So I love that. So the next thing I want to talk about is, I think a big part of overcoming self-sabotage is just preparing yourself and, you know, getting that knowledge like you were talking about. So I love the fact that you guys are like self-sustainable on your acreage. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, like how you got that set up, and I guess what you're thinking behind wanting to get that set up? I mean, I have an idea in my mind, but just for other listeners, like people who are like living in the city and have like, what, they got their own acreage, they're self-sustainable, why would you want to do that?
Yeah. So for me, look, when you go down the rabbit hole, because it all comes in together, like once you start your path and you're in alignment, things just come through to you. You can't ignore it. So that's where I went down. That's what I loved about Jason, was that I'd started to hear about stories, and I came across David Wilcox. It was the Financial Tyranny series that he did. If you ever come, it was years ago. I think he's got now a 5-hour video sort of explaining it all about the way the financial system goes in, Illuminati, like all your typical conspiracy theory. You know, I've got a range of tinfoil hats in my closet there, which I wear proudly. I love it. So, you know, deep into that. Well, not deep into it, but I'm aware of everything that's going on. And I'm right through the other stage of whatever it is. I will, nothing surprised me. But I'm very much solutions focused. Yes, we've got all the people are talking about the problems. They know what all the problems are. Yeah. So what's the solution? And so as I went through it all, the solution always is to get up as many systems as you can, be able to grow your own food, be self-sustainable as possible, have a community around you, la, 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 la. And that really has been my overarching goal. So, you know, I talk a lot, like I've got, like in my little program, Create Your Reality. It's doing this for me. I love this future visioning exercise. And I always ask this: if you didn't have to worry about time, money, or other people's expectations, what would you be doing? And in that space, it allows you to get curious with the possibilities. Anything, you can do anything you want. And I love to say in 10 years' time, because so much, we underestimate or we overestimate what can be done in a year. We underestimate what can be done in even 5 years, 10. That allows, if you're in a career and you think, I want to do something else and you need to study, you can study part-time alongside. Like, it gives you heaps of space to play with, and just get curious with it and see what comes up. And so for us, it was that wanting to, have a different lifestyle, being out in nature a lot more, was homeschooling, and just, having our own land and doing all our things. So that's where we work towards. So for us, initially it started, we found literally cheap beach houses near Melbourne. That's what I looked up. And we found this little shack a couple of hours away. We'd never been before. And so we took the drive out. And I remember when we went there, we looked at a few different houses, and we found this one house, and we're just like, this is the one. And it backed onto acreage. It was a little block, but it backed onto acreage, was right near the beach. Perfect. And so we found it, we bought it. This is around 7 or 8 years ago. And so from there, we were able to transition. We just had the city lifestyle, and then because there was no water. There's electricity to the house, but it was on gas, and you had water tanks and stuff like that. And so it was great just to get into that lifestyle. So when, like I said, in 2018, I was like, it's not, my husband was like, yeah, let's move, let's do this permanently. I was like, no, we can't do that. I was like, you know what, let's go. And so, we'll find acreage around. And so, as I said, we were there for the last couple of years. It was beautiful just to be in that space. Now, because alongside of my future visioning, I was always very much we've got amazing community around us. And it's not necessarily that people are like-minded, obviously that helps, but they're similar in thinking and in values. So being able to identify your own values is really important, because you know what it is that you want to attract and align in to that space. Because sometimes I find if you're really specific around things, it's like, it doesn't really happen. But when you're a bit more big picture, that's when things just work. So that was a really big one, because when we were then living permanently the last few years, being able to call in people was literally in the last year. I feels like I've known everyone forever, but we had started to make friends through the home ed community. But when you first start meeting and then suddenly you're in lockdown and so forth, it's really hard to try and suss people and go, oh, we're going to go for a walk here today. Would you happen to be there as well? You know, finding people within was a bit difficult because we didn't know anyone. But it was like, that's okay. We sort of persevered through, and then again through online connections. And then a friend, dearest friend now, had reached out and said, hey, we're catching up this Sunday at a park. Like-minded people, come down. So we're like, yes. And from there, a community formed and gathered during all these lockdowns and so forth. How do we support one another and coming all together? So for me, through that, we met then that next level, because as you sort of mentioned, it's who you're surrounded by and who you're with. And I was just even reflecting upon this the other day, in that now these beautiful friends that are with us in our community locally, like, they're farmers or people who've lived up on the land, or they're also just, you know, they're off the system and all that type of stuff. It's great because now we're learning new things and we can be supported through that. And so that's really helped to refine what it is that we wanted and where we wanted to go. So, you know, as you're looking, it was frustrating, but the time just happens. We finally found, we look at different land and different houses, and then suddenly this one came up. And I think a few weeks prior, I'd set out into the group, hey guys, we're looking for acreage. If anyone happens to see anything, just let us know. We're pretty flexible depending on the right thing. So just throw anything you've got at us. And a couple of weeks later, a friend messaged, she's like, hey, she goes, I've gone to some area because I've traveled to visit a friend. She goes, I saw this house. I don't know anything about it. I saw it, I'm like, oh, this looks pretty cute. I was like, son, let's go. And so I called and organised to come down. And it was funny, there was an open for inspection because someone was living here already. It was only set times. So we come here and there's all these cars. I'm like, oh. And there's something in me. I was like, oh, no, go away, people. This feels like it. Like, no, we don't want anyone here. And as we walked around, we just saw the way things were set up and what was here. We're just like, oh, this looks really good. So yeah, but then we just went in there, and you got to go after what you want as well, because we like next day, what do you need? We would like to make an offer, get started, because the housing, I mean, I don't know what it's like where you are, but it's just ridiculous, the amount that property is going for here. And I was like, this is going to go for way over what we're able to, but let's just get started and see how we go. But we just went in there, we were keen, we had, we were sort of ready to go. And she was like, yeah, this doesn't seem to be anyone else. There was someone else, but then, did a little counter offer, and that was it. And Nick, I remember, and we had gone away. We were traveling as well. We finally cut loose. We had a caravan and we were visiting up some friends. And so we were like making phone calls and all this. And yeah, we're able to get it. So it took a little while, but we're in here now. And things are just sort of, flowing, where, because we're similar to being off the grid, we'd like to now get our electricity moved over to be, off grid. The garden, the soil is really beautiful. So there is a couple of things here, but we've already, planted some trees already. It's winter, we're getting into spring now. So it's the perfect time to start getting our seedlings up and ready. We've already identified a place which will be really good for it. And just, it's slow going. So meaning just being with the land. Like, I don't want to rush anything, because it's really important to just work and see how everything flows within the 4 seasons and how everything works. But there's just, a real intention to be able to grow enough for us, but also to share with our community and friends and family, because that's the abundance that comes into that beautiful space as well. And just even with that knowledge of farmers, like, oh, we have a clue, and now we're getting ready for a couple of little cows to come along and eat this luscious grass that we have got going on. And so it's going to be a whole new thing. But we've got friends who are organic farmers, so I've been with them when they've had someone come along and done the butchering and packing everything up and what's the different cuts, and then making your own sausages and how we're going to put our beautiful organ meats within, and to be able to nourish and sustain, and buying things like that. So then you've got a different way of cooking as well. You've got to plan more things, and knowing what it is that we like to eat, and having all of those planted and ready to go and stuff like that.
Wow, that's so awesome. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, I'm super interested in getting my own self-sustainable system set up, and creating community like you have. I think that's so important, and it's fantastic you were able to find that even during the lockdown. Just goes to show even if things are kind of against you, you can get the things you want if you just go out there and just go for it. Like you were talking about, you got the house and you created the community. So that's so fantastic. So, well, I guess we're kind of running over the time frame here, but so I guess we'll have one last question here just to tie it all up. So for anyone listening, what is this kind of one big thing you want them to take away from this call? If it's one thing, or just kind of one general idea or whatever, what would you like them to take away from this call if they, maybe forget everything else somehow and,
Yeah. Well, what's coming through to me is the whole thing of the stop, drop, and breathe. Get back into your body, because I know me, I'm a mental woof. I'm up here, la 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 la, and that's what drives my escapism and all that type of stuff. But I've got a very strong mental energy. So being back into the body allows you to feel. And it's that whole concept, you need to feel it to heal it, because when we're disassociated or disconnected, it's really hard to make those changes, because when you feel it, you can really go deep into actually, well, what is it that I need? And not only what is it I need and how can I give that self to me. It's not the surface level of, oh, if only they just listen to me, then everything would be okay. Well, what do I actually need to be really heard? And what does it actually feel like? So suddenly you've got that star, that, guiding star to move towards. Okay, I'm feeling sad or unloved. Well, something for me is how do I, peace, joy, and ease. That's, when I'm feeling in balance and aligned, peace, joy, and ease are some of mine. And so when I'm dropping into my body, I'm like, I ain't feeling that. Well, what is it I need? I know I've got the work, and I make that decision. And there's times where I choose to wallow in it, and that's okay. What do I need? And how do I need to release this energy up and out? Because it's not always the Zen breathing meditation, calming, that's amazing. There are sometimes when you've got this excess energy, especially if there's a lot of wounds and traumas and stories back there, getting it up and out of your body, whether you need to scream into a pillow or, I don't know, just shadow boxing, or just chuck on some music and dance, and you've got to act like a toddler and stamp it all out, whatever. Shift that energy, that excess energy and adrenaline up and out of the body. Afterwards, there's often the dip, and you might feel it's a quiet space, and you might notice it could be even sadness or whatever that goes into that, or calm. But again, you transform that. Well, what do I need? Stop, drop, breathe into that, and then call upon, well, what would my inner carer do? What would I do if I was doing this to a child or to my younger self? And just experiment and play with that, and just see what comes up and notice, and just give yourself that beautiful gift of kindness and love and compassion to self.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And yeah, I just gotta say, it's been so interesting, such an interesting story. I just love the way you explain yourself and the way you talk. So, I could probably talk to you all day and be just fascinated by it. So, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and for sharing your story. If someone is interested in finding you, I'll put your links down below, but just kind of quick for them, like for the listeners, where can they find you?
Thank you so much. Okay. Best place, I'm most active over on Instagram, and I'm annagrillo.trueself there. But my website as well is trueself.com.au. So I work with people one-on-one. I do have a couple of online instant download programs that people like to do it themselves with tapping and self-reflection and meditations. I'm also starting to teach EFT as well. So, you know, if you like the concept of know thyself, I'm doing that too. But yeah, and I thank you so much, because this, you know, hearing people's stories is so important, and people resonate and know that, you know, what's possible out there. So thank you so much, Tanner, for your gifts and sharing us into the world.
Of course, thank you. Yeah, and everyone listening, yeah, go check out her stuff. It sounds like some fantastic material, and you know, some really important things you can learn to be able to, you know, methods and techniques you can use to really address, you know, the self-sabotage in your life, and the, you know, the stress and different things like that as well. So know thyself, just like she's talking about. And thank you all for listening, and thank you, Anna, for coming on the podcast.
Pleasure. Bye.